5 men ambushed a billionaire at a restaurant. Until the maid's daughter, hidden skill, shocked everyone. Quiet. Phones on the table. Now, the order cut through the golden hum of the Aurelia restaurant like shattered glass. 5 men in maintenance uniforms had just locked the doors of the most exclusive dining room in the city. At the corner booth sat Walter Harrington, billionaire and defense tycoon. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he barked, before a gun was pressed against his temple. But while fear spread like wildfire across the room, one teenager didn't flinch. She wasn't a mogul, a senator, or a celebrity. She was the maid's daughter, 15 years old, invisible, unimportant, or so everyone thought. This is the story of how Chloe Bennett turned a billionaire's ambush into something far more dangerous, and why it was only the beginning. Just before we dive in, let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. We love seeing how far these stories reach. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss tomorrow's special video. Now let's jump back in. Enjoy the story. 5 men ambushed a billionaire in a restaurant, expecting an easy score. They never counted on the quiet girl in the corner, the maid's daughter. Her hidden skill was about to shock everyone. The quiet hum of the Aurelia restaurant was the sound of money. It was a soft, confident murmur, the clinking of heavy silverware on fine china, the whisper of sommeliers suggesting wines that cost more than a used car. Perched atop a skyscraper in the heart of downtown, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a glittering panorama of the city lights, a kingdom of glass and steel for the kings and queens who dined within. Tonight, the most prominent king was Walter Harrington. He sat at the best table, a corner booth upholstered in deep velvet, a small island of immense power. Harrington was a man sculpted by success. His suit was tailored to perfection, his silver hair was impeccably styled, and his watch was a subtle masterpiece of Swiss engineering. As the CEO of Harrington Dynamics, a sprawling defense contractor, he didn't just move markets, he moved armies. He was one of the richest, most powerful men in the country, and he wore his influence with the casual ease of a favorite coat. Across the table, a nervous politician nodded along to Harrington's monologue, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't particularly funny. Harrington enjoyed this. He enjoyed the deference, the quiet fear, the unspoken understanding that his favor could make or break a man's career. His gaze drifted idly around the room, assessing, categorizing. He saw hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and old money heirs, all performing the same ritual dance of wealth. It was his world, and he was its master. A short distance away, near a service station polished to a mirror shine, stood a woman who was invisible to him. Susan Bennett moved with a quiet efficiency that made her blend into the luxurious background. She wore the simple, elegant black uniform of the restaurant staff, her expression professionally serene. For the past 12 years, Susan had been the head housekeeper at Walter Harrington's sprawling city penthouse. Tonight, her boss had insisted she work a private event at his favorite restaurant, a last-minute demand she couldn't refuse. Her job was to be a ghost, anticipating needs before they arose, ensuring that Mr. Harrington's evening was seamless. Her daughter, Chloe, sat at a small, out-of-the-way table meant for staff on their break. She was 15, with a cascade of simple blonde hair tied back in a practical ponytail. She wore a plain gray sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to the designer gowns and bespoke suits that filled the room. A well-worn textbook and a half-finished glass of water were on her table. To any casual observer, she was just a teenager waiting for her mother to finish work, her head bent over her homework, lost in a world of algebra and history. But Chloe wasn't studying. Her eyes were down, but her senses were taking in everything. Her grandfather's voice was a constant, gentle echo in her mind. "Observation is your first and best weapon, kiddo," he used to say, his voice warm with the memory of sunshine and old leather. Most people look, but they don't see. You need to see. So Chloe saw. She saw the politician's sweat beading on his upper lip, a clear sign of his desperation. She saw the way the restaurant manager, a man named Mr. Du Bois, kept a respectful distance from Harrington's table but never truly looked away, his posture radiating a tense desire to please. She counted the exits, the grand front entrance, 2 kitchen doors, and a service elevator at the end of the hall. She noted the security cameras, tucked discreetly into the corners of the ornate ceiling. She saw the patterns of the waiters, the rhythm of the kitchen, the subtle hierarchy of the entire establishment. Her gaze fell on her mother. She saw the faint lines of fatigue around Susan's eyes, the slight stiffness in her back from hours on her feet. She saw the practiced, polite smile that never quite reached her eyes, the mask she wore to navigate a world that paid her to be unseen. A pang of love and anger went through Chloe. Her mother deserved so much more than this life of quiet servitude to men like Walter Harrington. Harrington gestured impatiently, and Susan glided to his table instantly. "More water, Mr. Harrington?" she asked, her voice soft and deferential. He didn't even look at her. "Yes. And tell Du Bois the air is stuffy. I'm paying for comfort, not a sauna." He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, turning back to his guest. Susan murmured, "Right away, sir," and retreated. Chloe's jaw tightened. She hated the way he treated her mother, like a piece of furniture that could talk. Her grandfather had taught her about men like Harrington. Arrogance is a fatal flaw, Chloe. A man who believes he's untouchable is a man who's already lost. He never checks his flanks. The thought brought a fresh wave of grief. General Michael Coleman, her grandfather, had been gone for 2 years now. A sudden, shocking heart attack, the doctors had said. It had felt wrong then, and it felt wrong now. He had been a pillar of strength, a mountain of integrity who had served his country for 40 years. He was the man who taught her how to read a map and the stars, how to tie 13 different kinds of knots, and how to spot a lie in a man's eyes. He had taught her strategy using a chessboard and self-defense in the grassy expanse of their backyard. He called it life skills. Her mother called it filling her head with nonsense. But for Chloe, it was his legacy. It was all she had left of him. Her thoughts were cut short by a sudden, jarring noise. The grand oak doors of the restaurant slammed shut with a heavy, final thud. A thick metal lock clicked into place, the sound unnaturally loud in the hushed room. The gentle murmur of conversation died instantly. Heads turned. A nervous silence fell, thick and heavy with confusion. Then, a voice, rough and cold, sliced through the quiet. Nobody moved. Phones on the table. Now, 5 men stood by the entrance. They were dressed in the dark blue overalls of a city maintenance crew, but there were no tools in their hands. There were only guns. They were large, black, and utterly terrifying. The leader, a big man with a thick neck and a jagged scar that cut through his left eyebrow, pointed his weapon at the ceiling. His eyes, small and hard like pebbles, scanned the room full of millionaires. The elegant buzz of the Aurelia had just been replaced by the raw, brutal language of violence. The panic was instantaneous, a tidal wave of fear that swept through the dining room. A woman screamed, a short, sharp cry that was quickly stifled. The nervous politician at Harrington's table went pale, looking as if he might faint. The diners, moments ago the masters of their universe, were now just frightened people, their wealth and power utterly useless. Walter Harrington, however, reacted with fury, not fear. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he snarled, half rising from his seat. The leader of the robbers turned his cold eyes on him. He gave a cruel, humorless smile. "Yeah, you're our gold mine for the night. Sit down." Now, another of the men, lean and jumpy, moved quickly to Harrington's side, pressing the muzzle of his gun into the billionaire's temple. Harrington froze, his face a mask of shocked rage. He slowly, reluctantly, sank back into his chair. The robbers moved with practiced efficiency. 2 guarded the door, their guns sweeping across the room. The other 3 fanned out, one grabbing a velvet rope to herd the terrified patrons into the center of the room. The jumpy one stayed on Harrington, while the leader, Gus, strode toward the middle of the floor. "Like I said," Gus bellowed, his voice echoing in the terrified silence. "Phones on the table. Wallets. Jewelry. Put it all in the bag." He tossed a canvas duffel bag onto a nearby table. "And you," he said, pointing a thick finger at Harrington. "You're going to make a little phone call. A wire transfer. $50 million. You do that, and we all go home happy." Susan Bennett had flattened herself against the wall near the service station, her body trembling. Her eyes darted around, searching for Chloe. She saw her daughter, still sitting at the small table, seemingly frozen in place. A wave of pure terror washed over Susan. She had to get to her. She had to protect her. But Chloe wasn't frozen. While everyone else was consumed by fear, she was consumed by a chilling, absolute clarity. Her grandfather's training had taken over. The world had slowed down. The panic, the shouting, the fear, it all faded into background noise. Her mind was a calm, cold engine of calculation. 5 hostiles, she thought, her eyes flicking from man to man. Leader, let's call him Scarface. Jumpy, by Harrington. 2 on the door, let's call them left door and right door. 1 more, the collector, moving through the tables. She analyzed their positions, their weapons, their postures. They were amateurs. Cocky. They held their guns with confidence, but without discipline. Their formation was sloppy. They were focused on the money, on Harrington, and considered everyone else to be irrelevant. A critical mistake. Never underestimate your opponent, kiddo, the general's voice whispered in her memory. But always exploit it when they underestimate you. She was the maid's daughter, a 15-year-old girl in a cheap sweater. She was invisible, and in this room, invisible was the most dangerous thing she could be. Hey, you, the voice belonged to the collector. He had noticed her. He stomped over to her table, the duffel bag slung over his shoulder. What are you, deaf? Phone. Now, he snarled, gesturing at the table with his gun. Chloe slowly lifted her head. She looked at him, her expression not of fear, but of mild annoyance, as if he had interrupted her from a particularly difficult math problem. She met his eyes. There was no terror there, just a calm, unnerving stillness. I don't have a phone, she said, her voice even. The man scoffed. Every kid has a phone. Don't lie to me. He gestured again, more aggressively this time. Empty your pockets. Chloe stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. I have nothing for you. Her mother, Susan, saw the confrontation and a strangled cry escaped her lips. Chloe, no. Just do what he says. The collector's attention snapped to Susan. That your kid? Keep her quiet, or I'll do it for you. He turned back to Chloe, his face twisted in a sneer. You think you're tough? You think you're special? Chloe's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. She looked past the robber, her gaze locking onto a heavy silver platter on a nearby serving cart. Then her eyes moved to the ornate, heavy-bottomed wine cooler standing next to it. Finally, she looked at the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall just inside the kitchen doors. A plan, clean and precise, formed in her mind. 3 targets of opportunity. 3 steps. Create a diversion. Neutralize the immediate threat. Secure an exit. No, Chloe replied, her voice still disarmingly calm. I just think my grandfather raised me better than to let a man with a gun push my mother around. The comment was so unexpected, so completely out of place, that the robber actually hesitated. In that moment of hesitation, Chloe moved. It wasn't a panicked rush. It was a fluid, economical motion, a dance of physics and leverage that her grandfather had drilled into her for years. She took 1 step to her left, grabbed the edge of the heavy linen tablecloth on the serving cart, and pulled. The cart's contents, the silver platter, glasses, a half-empty bottle of champagne, crashed to the floor with an explosive shatter of glass and metal. The noise was a thunderclap in the tense room. Every head, including those of the other 4 robbers, snapped toward the sound. The collector, startled, took an involuntary step back. It was all the opening Chloe needed. In the same fluid motion, she pivoted. Her right hand shot out, not to strike him, but to grab the handle of the heavy, ice-filled wine cooler. She didn't try to lift it. She used its weight as an anchor, swinging her body around it. Her right leg came up in a low, powerful arc, her worn sneaker connecting squarely with the back of the robber's knee. His leg buckled with a sickening pop. He grunted in pain and surprise, his balance gone. As he stumbled forward, Chloe was already moving again. She used his own momentum against him, her shoulder dipping as she stepped into his path. She wasn't big, but she was fast, and she knew exactly where to apply pressure. She slammed her body into his, driving him face first into the wall right next to the kitchen doors. His head hit the plaster with a dull thud. His gun clattered to the marble floor. He slumped down, groaning, momentarily out of the fight. The entire sequence had taken less than 3 seconds. A collective gasp went through the room. The silence that followed was one of profound shock. The robbers stared, their minds struggling to process what had just happened. Walter Harrington's jaw was hanging open. Susan Bennett looked at her daughter as if she were a stranger, her heart pounding with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. Chloe didn't pause to admire her work. She scooped up the fallen gun, her hands steady. She didn't point it at anyone. Instead, she backed away quickly toward the kitchen doors, her eyes scanning the remaining 4 men. "Mom!" she shouted, her voice sharp and clear, cutting through the stunned silence. "Kitchen! Now!" Her command broke the spell. The leader, Gus, recovered first. A look of pure fury replaced his surprise. "Get her," he roared. "Shoot that little." But his men were hesitant. The calm, collected patrons were one thing. A 15-year-old girl who could take down a grown man in seconds was something else entirely. It was a variable they hadn't planned for. Left door and right door raised their weapons, but they had no clear shot. Chloe was already pushing through the swinging kitchen doors. Jumpy, still standing over Harrington, swiveled his gun toward the kitchen, but he couldn't fire without hitting other people. The diversion had worked perfectly. As the robbers' attention focused on the kitchen, the patrons began to react, their survival instincts finally overriding their fear. People started scrambling, diving under tables, creating more chaos. Walter Harrington seized the moment. He lunged sideways, knocking his chair into Jumpy's legs. The gunman stumbled, cursing, giving Harrington the precious second he needed to dive behind the velvet booth for cover. Inside the kitchen, the sounds of controlled chaos erupted. Chloe hadn't fled. She was fighting. There were shouts, the crash of pots and pans, a sharp hiss. Gus, his face purple with rage, made a decision. The plan was falling apart. "Forget the girl. Get the money," he screamed at Jumpy. "Finish the transfer." He and the other 2 gunmen started moving toward the center of the room, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The element of surprise was gone, replaced by a wild card they could never have anticipated. They had ambushed a billionaire in a restaurant, expecting to find sheep. Instead, they had found a wolf disguised as a lamb. And she was just getting started. The kitchen was a maze of stainless steel and controlled panic. Chefs and line cooks, who had been hiding behind counters and in pantries, stared with wide eyes as Chloe burst through the doors. She ignored them, her mind already on the next step. Control the environment, Chloe. The battlefield is never just the ground you stand on. It's everything around you. She grabbed the heavy fire extinguisher from its wall mount. Her hands knew the familiar weight, the feel of the pin under her thumb. Her grandfather had made her practice with one in their backyard, spraying foam at imaginary enemies until she could deploy it in her sleep. She didn't wait for the robbers to come to her. She kicked open one of the swinging doors just enough to create a gap and shoved the nozzle through. A thick, white cloud of CO2 foam blasted into the dining room, aimed directly at the 2 robbers moving to regain control. The men yelled in shock, stumbling back as the cold, blinding foam hit them. It wasn't lethal, but it was disorienting. It coated their faces, stung their eyes, and made the marble floor slick and treacherous. One of them slipped, his feet going out from under him, and landed hard on his back. "Move!" Chloe yelled to her mother, who was now huddled with the kitchen staff. "There's a service exit in the back. Get out." Susan, her face as white as a sheet, was paralyzed. "But what are you doing?" "What Grandpa taught me," Chloe said, her voice tight with focus. "Now go." The leader, Gus, wiped the foam from his eyes, roaring with frustration. He fired his gun blindly toward the kitchen, the bullet tearing a chunk out of the door frame. "I'm gonna kill that kid." Chloe ducked back as splinters flew. She dropped the extinguisher and scanned her new environment. Pots, pans, knives, boiling water, heavy sacks of flour. It was an arsenal. The Jumpy robber, having recovered from Harrington's shove, decided to be a hero. He charged for the kitchen doors. He burst through, his gun raised, expecting to find a scared teenager. He found a strategist. Chloe had positioned herself beside a large, industrial-grade mixer. As he came through the door, she kicked a 50-pound sack of flour that she had dragged into his path. The sack ripped open on impact, sending a massive white cloud into the air. The robber gasped, inhaling a lungful of fine powder. He began to cough violently, his eyes watering, his vision completely obscured. He was blind. He fired his gun wildly, the shot going harmlessly into the ceiling. Before he could recover, Chloe was on him. She used a heavy-bottomed frying pan not as a club, but as a tool of leverage. She hooked it behind his gun arm and twisted, using a technique her grandfather had adapted from a military disarming maneuver. The man's wrist bent at an unnatural angle. He screamed in pain, his fingers spasming open. The gun fell to the floor. Chloe kicked it under a low steel prep table. She finished the move with a sharp, precise jab of her elbow to a pressure point just below his ribs. The air rushed out of his lungs, and he collapsed to his knees, gasping and choking. 2 down, 3 to go. Back in the dining room, the situation was deteriorating for the robbers. The foam had created chaos. The other patrons, emboldened by the robbers' confusion, were no longer passive victims. Some were running for the main doors, creating a human barrier. Mr. Du Bois, the manager, had managed to crawl to a service phone and was frantically whispering to the police. Walter Harrington, peeking over the top of his booth, watched the scene unfold with a stunned expression. He had seen private security teams, highly trained professionals, handle threats. But he had never seen anything like this. A child, the daughter of his housekeeper, was systematically dismantling a team of armed men with nothing but her wits and her environment. Gus saw his plan evaporating. The money was gone. The only thing left was anger. He looked at the 2 remaining members of his team. Forget the money. We're not leaving empty-handed. His wild eyes landed on Susan Bennett, who was still frozen near the edge of the kitchen, torn between escaping and staying for her daughter. Grab the woman. The move was born of desperation, but it was the one thing Chloe hadn't fully anticipated. One of the robbers, the one who had slipped on the foam, scrambled to his feet and lunged for Susan. No! Chloe screamed, her icy calm finally cracking. She ran from the kitchen, back into the main dining area. She was too far away. The man grabbed Susan, pulling her back and using her as a human shield. He pressed his gun to her mother's head. That's enough, kid, Gus shouted, a triumphant, ugly sneer spreading across his face. You stop right now, or mommy gets it. Drop the gun you picked up. Kick it over here. Chloe stood in the middle of the dining room, the robber's heavy pistol still in her hand. Her eyes were locked on her mother. She could see the sheer terror on Susan's face, the tears streaming down her cheeks. For the first time that night, Chloe felt a stab of real fear. Her mind raced. He has leverage. He has a hostage. Standard procedure. De-escalate, comply, and wait for an opening. But this wasn't a textbook exercise. This was her mother. Emotion is a weapon, Chloe, her grandfather's voice cautioned in her memory. It can be used by you or against you. Control it. Don't let it control you. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing the fear down. She looked at Gus, then at the man holding her mother. She noted his stance. It was sloppy. His focus was entirely on her, not on his grip. Her mother was not a passive victim. Susan was small, but she was strong. Chloe had to give her an opening. Okay, Chloe said, her voice shaking slightly, but it was a calculated tremor. She let them see the scared little girl they expected to see. Okay, you win. Don't hurt her. She slowly bent down and placed the gun on the floor. Kick it, Gus commanded. She slid it across the polished marble floor. It spun to a stop near his feet. Good girl, Gus said, relaxing slightly. He thought he had won. Now, we're all going to walk out of here nice and slow. You, he jabbed a finger at the man holding Susan. You keep her close. Chloe's eyes met her mother's over the robber's shoulder. For a split second, their gazes locked. In that fraction of a second, Chloe gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. Then she shifted her eyes downward, to the robber's foot. It was a signal they had never practiced, a language they didn't know they shared. But a mother knows her child. Susan saw the look, and some of Chloe's impossible calm seemed to transfer to her. She understood. As the robber started to drag Susan toward the front door, Chloe took a small, shuffling step forward. Please, she whimpered, let her go. Take me instead. It was the perfect distraction. Gus and the other robber focused on Chloe, savoring their victory over the troublesome girl. The man holding Susan also glanced at Chloe, a smirk on his face. In that instant of distraction, Susan acted. She lifted her foot and brought the hard heel of her sensible work shoe down on the robber's instep. She stomped with all the force of her fear and her fury. The man screamed, a high-pitched shriek of agony. His grip on Susan loosened for just a second. It was the opening. Chloe exploded into motion. She wasn't running at the man holding her mother. She was running at the fourth robber, the one standing near Gus. She launched herself forward in a low tackle, not aiming for his body, but for his legs. She hit him just below the knees. He toppled over like a felled tree, his head cracking against the edge of a heavy oak table. He was out cold. At the same time, the first sirens began to wail in the distance. Faint at first, but growing louder with every passing second. The sound broke the remaining robber's nerve. The man Susan had stomped shoved her away, forgetting his role as a captor and thinking only of escape. Gus, the leader, saw it was over. He looked at the carnage. 3 of his men down. The police were seconds away. He looked at Chloe, who was already getting to her feet, her eyes burning with a cold fire he had only ever seen in hardened combat veterans. He made the only choice he had left. He turned and ran for the kitchen, hoping to find the back exit Chloe had mentioned. He never made it. As he ran past Walter Harrington's table, the billionaire, who had been hiding this whole time, stuck out his leg. It was a clumsy, desperate move, but it was enough. Gus tripped, sprawling forward onto the floor. Before he could get up, Chloe was there. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't need one. She simply stood over him, her small frame casting a long shadow in the dim, chaotic light of the restaurant. The sirens were deafening now. Red and blue lights flashed through the tall windows, painting the scene in strobing colors. The front doors burst open, and heavily armed police officers swarmed in, shouting commands. The siege of the Aurelia was over. In the stunned silence that followed, as police handcuffed the groaning robbers and paramedics attended to the injured, everyone's eyes were on Chloe. She stood there, breathing heavily, her blonde ponytail slightly askew. She looked around the wrecked dining room, at the terrified faces of the city's elite, at the downed criminals, and finally, at her mother. Susan ran to her, wrapping her arms around her daughter, sobbing with relief and confusion. "Chloe, how did you do that?" Chloe leaned into her mother's embrace, the adrenaline finally beginning to fade, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice muffled in her mother's shoulder. "Grandpa taught me." Across the room, Walter Harrington was being helped to his feet by an officer. He brushed off his expensive suit, his expression a mixture of relief, anger, and something else, a deep, unsettling curiosity. He stared at the maid's daughter. She was no longer invisible to him. He looked at this child who had single-handedly saved his life and his fortune, and for the first time, he felt a sliver of fear. One of the conscious robbers, being led away in cuffs, spat on the floor near Harrington. "You're a lucky man," he sneered. "We weren't the only ones after you tonight. Just the first. Nightingale sends his regards." The name hung in the air. Nightingale. Harrington's blood ran cold. The color drained from his face. His eyes shot to Chloe, a wild, accusing look in them. It was impossible. No one knew that name. It was a ghost from a past he had buried under a mountain of money and lies. Chloe met his gaze. Her expression was unreadable, her blue eyes as calm and deep as a frozen lake. But Harrington saw it. He saw the flicker of recognition, the barest hint of a shadow in their depths. And in that moment, he understood. The robbery wasn't random. This wasn't over. It was just the beginning. The hours that followed were a blur of flashing lights, crackling radios, and the sharp, authoritative voices of law enforcement. The Aurelia, once a sanctuary of quiet luxury, had become a crime scene. Paramedics treated minor injuries, detectives questioned shaken patrons, and forensic teams dusted for prints. Through it all, Chloe sat wrapped in a coarse wool blanket on the steps of an ambulance, a cup of lukewarm, sugary tea held loosely in her hands. The adrenaline had long since drained away, leaving a profound weariness that settled deep in her bones. She watched the organized chaos with the detached calm of a spectator. She answered the questions of a kind-faced but perceptive detective named Miller, her answers simple, direct, and carefully edited. "I just got lucky," she said, keeping her gaze fixed on her worn sneakers. "The guy who grabbed me wasn't paying attention. I pulled a tablecloth. He slipped." "And the man in the kitchen?" Detective Miller asked, his pen poised over his notepad. "The kitchen staff said you took him down with a sack of flour and a frying pan. That's a little more than lucky, wouldn't you say?" Chloe shrugged, making the blanket bunch up around her shoulders. "He couldn't see. I just pushed him. He fell." Miller studied her for a long moment. He'd been a cop for 20 years. He knew when a story was too neat, too clean. But the facts were undeniable. The girl had neutralized 2 armed men and created the opening that stopped the robbery. "Your grandfather taught you how to defend yourself?" "He taught me to pay attention." Chloe corrected softly. He said most trouble can be avoided if you just see it coming. It was the truth, just not the whole truth. A few feet away, her mother, Susan, was giving her own statement, her voice still trembling. Her eyes kept darting toward Chloe, filled with a bewildered mix of pride, fear, and a dawning, unsettling understanding that the child she had raised was a stranger to her. The quiet, bookish girl who did her homework and helped with the laundry had vanished, replaced by someone with the reflexes of a soldier and the eyes of a hawk. The true storm, however, was centered around Walter Harrington. He stood apart from the other patrons, flanked by two stone-faced men in dark suits who must have been his private security. He wasn't talking to the police. He was talking into his phone, his voice a low, urgent snarl. Detective Miller approached him, but Harrington waved him away with an imperious gesture. "This is now a matter of corporate security," Harrington stated, his voice like ice. "My people will handle the internal investigation. Your department can handle the street trash." He ended his call, and his eyes, cold and flinty, found Chloe. He stared at her, not with gratitude, but with a palpable, unnerving intensity. It was the look of a man who has just seen a ghost. The name the robber had spoken, Nightingale, had not been mentioned to the police. It was a secret that now hung in the air between the billionaire and the maid's daughter, a shared poison that changed everything. Eventually, the chaos subsided. The patrons were allowed to leave, scurrying away into the night, their brush with mortality already being spun into a thrilling story for their friends. The robbers, both the conscious and the unconscious, were taken away in police vans. Harrington's driver pulled a sleek, black sedan to the curb. One of his security men opened the rear door. "Susan," Harrington called out, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Get your daughter. We're leaving." The ride to Harrington's penthouse was a study in suffocating silence. The car moved like a phantom through the sleeping city, the streetlights tracing silent patterns across the faces of its three occupants. Susan sat huddled against her door, stealing worried glances at Chloe. Harrington sat opposite them, his hands clasped on his knee, his gaze fixed intently on the girl. Chloe simply stared out the window, watching the city slide by. She felt his eyes on her, dissecting her, trying to solve the puzzle she presented. She knew what he was thinking. "Who are you? How do you know that name?" "I don't," she thought, "but I'm going to find out." When they arrived at the penthouse, a sprawling palace of glass and marble perched atop the city, the familiar space felt alien. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Harrington dismissed his security detail with a nod. "Susan," he said, turning to her, "go and get some rest. We'll talk in the morning." It was a command, not a suggestion. Susan hesitated, looking at her daughter. "Chloe, I'm fine, Mom," Chloe said, giving her a small, reassuring smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just tired." Reluctantly, Susan retreated to the small staff quarters tucked away in a service wing of the massive apartment. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving Chloe alone with the billionaire. Harrington walked over to a vast window that overlooked the glittering city. For a long time, he said nothing, his back to her. "Your grandfather," he said finally, his voice low and strained. "General Michael Coleman. A great man. A patriot." "Yes, sir," Chloe said. He turned to face her. The polite mask of the powerful CEO was gone. In its place was a raw, naked fear. "He never mentioned a project he and I worked on. Years ago. Code name, Nightingale." Chloe kept her expression neutral, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. "No, sir. He didn't talk much about his work. He said it was classified." Harrington's eyes narrowed. He was searching for any flicker of deception, any hint that she was lying. "The man in the restaurant. He said Nightingale sent his regards." "What did that mean to you?" "It meant he was trying to scare you," Chloe answered simply. It worked. The bluntness of her statement seemed to knock the air out of him. He stared at her, this small, unassuming girl in a cheap sweater who spoke with the unnerving confidence of an equal. "Your grandfather, his death," Harrington said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "A heart attack," they said. He was in perfect health. A cold dread, a suspicion she had buried for 2 years, began to surface in Chloe's mind. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," Harrington leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper, "that I don't believe in coincidences. And I don't believe your grandfather's death was natural. Not anymore." The words hit Chloe with the force of a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. Her grandfather, her hero, the strongest man she had ever known, murdered? The idea was monstrous, unthinkable. Yet, as soon as Harrington said it, a dark part of her mind knew it was true. It explained the nagging wrongness of it all, the feeling that a piece of the puzzle had always been missing. Why? Chloe asked, her voice small and tight. Who would kill him? Someone who wanted Nightingale to stay buried, Harrington said, his gaze distant, lost in a dark memory. It was a deniable ops program. Off the books. We were tasked with neutralizing threats to national security, foreign and domestic. The general was the strategist. I provided the funding and the technology through my company. He began to pace, his agitation growing. We did things that had to be done, but things that could never see the light of day. We made enemies, powerful enemies. When the oversight committee got wind of it, we were ordered to shut it down. Erase everything. We buried it, Chloe. Or so we thought. He stopped and looked at her, his expression grim. Someone knows. They know what we did. And they're coming for me. That robbery tonight, it wasn't about the money. It was a message, a declaration of war. And they used that name to let me know that they know everything. Chloe felt the world shifting under her feet. Her entire life, the stories her grandfather told, the games he taught her, it was all being recast in a new, terrifying light. He wasn't just a retired soldier. He was a spy master. And the skills he had passed on to her were not for self-defense. They were for survival in a world of shadows she never knew existed. Why are you telling me this? She asked, her voice regaining its strength. Harrington gave a short, bitter laugh. Because your grandfather was the most brilliant, dangerous man I ever knew. And tonight I saw his ghost. I saw it in you. He walked over to a sleek, minimalist desk and pressed a hidden button. A panel on the wall slid open, revealing a high-tech security console. He typed in a long code, then pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner. With a soft hiss, another, smaller panel opened, this one revealing a safe. From it, he pulled out a slim, black laptop. It was unadorned, with no logos or markings of any kind. This belonged to him, Harrington said, placing the laptop on the desk. He gave it to me for safekeeping a week before he died. He said if anything ever happened to him, I was to give it to you, and only you, when you were ready. He said you would know what to do with it. Harrington looked at her, his fear now mixed with a desperate, calculating hope. I didn't understand then. I think I'm beginning to understand now. He wasn't just teaching you games, was he? He was training you. He was preparing you for this. Chloe walked slowly toward the desk. She looked at the laptop, then up at the billionaire. For years, he had been a distant, arrogant figure in her life, her mother's employer, a man to be avoided and placated. Now, he was a man whose life depended on her. The power dynamic in the room had been completely inverted. He taught me to finish what I start, she said, her hand resting on the cool metal of the laptop. A new, cold resolve settled over her. The grief for her grandfather was still there, a raw, open wound. But now, it was joined by something else, a burning, unyielding anger. Someone had taken him from her. Someone had murdered him to protect a secret. And she was going to find out who. The first light of dawn was painting the sky in shades of gray and pink when Chloe finally opened the laptop. She did it in the quiet of her own small room, a space that suddenly felt like a cage. Her mother was asleep, exhausted by the trauma of the night. The laptop hummed to life, its screen displaying a single, stark image, a chessboard, with the pieces set up in the middle of a game. Below it was a blinking cursor, waiting for a password. It wasn't a question. It was a test. Chloe studied the board. It was a famous position, one her grandfather had made her study for weeks. The Fischer-Spassky game, 1972. The turning point of the Cold War on a chessboard. But the position was slightly altered. One of the pawns was out of place. Details, Chloe. The truth is always in the details that no one else bothers to look at. She knew the move. Fischer's brilliant, unorthodox pawn sacrifice. She typed it into the password field using standard algebraic notation. BXH2+. The screen went black for a second, then resolved into a simple, text-based operating system. There were no icons, no graphics. Just a list of encrypted files with cryptic names, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and one that made her breath catch in her throat, Nightingale. She clicked on the Nightingale file. Another password prompt appeared. This one was different. It was a question. What is the price of silence? Chloe didn't have to think. It was a phrase from one of her grandfather's favorite books, a worn copy of Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. He had underlined the passage and made her memorize it. She typed the answer. Everything. The file decrypted. It wasn't a dossier or a report. It was a web, a complex diagram of names, dates, and locations, all connected by lines of influence and money. In the center was Walter Harrington and Harrington Dynamics. Branching off from him were offshore accounts, shell corporations, and clandestine meetings. And at the end of several of those branches was one recurring name, Senator James Prescott, the same nervous politician who had been at Harrington's table the night before. But it was the other side of the web that made her blood run cold. Another central node, labeled Nightingale, was connected not to corporations, but to a series of dates. Each date corresponded to a high-profile, unsolved accident or disappearance over the past 15 years. A journalist investigating military contracts who died in a car crash. A whistleblower at a rival tech firm who vanished while hiking. A foreign diplomat who suffered a sudden, fatal aneurysm. And the last date on the list, 2 years ago, was linked to a single name, General Michael Coleman. Cause of death, heart attack. Chloe stared at the screen, the terrible truth laid bare in cold, digital lines. Nightingale wasn't just a program. It was an assassination squad. Her grandfather and Harrington hadn't just been neutralizing threats. They had been killing people. A wave of nausea washed over her. Her grandfather, the man who taught her about honor and integrity, was a killer? It didn't make sense. It couldn't be true. She dug deeper, opening the other files. Socrates contained audio logs, her grandfather's voice, calm and measured, dictating his notes. She listened, her hands trembling. September 14th, the familiar voice said, the recording dated just 3 days before his death. Harrington is becoming reckless. The targets are no longer threats. They are business rivals, political obstacles. He's twisting Nightingale's purpose, using it to build his own empire. Prescott is in his pocket. He's feeding him classified intelligence in exchange for political favors and defense contracts. This was not the mission. This is corruption. This is murder for profit. I have to shut him down. I'm meeting with an old contact from the AG's office. I've prepared a package, a dead man switch. If Harrington finds out, he will see it as a betrayal. He will not hesitate to add my name to the list. The recording ended. Chloe sat in stunned silence, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Her grandfather hadn't been a murderer. He had been trying to stop one. He discovered Harrington was using their secret Black Ops team to eliminate personal enemies and consolidate power. He had planned to expose him, and Harrington had killed him for it. The robbery wasn't a message for Harrington from an old enemy. It was a message from a new one. The people who sent those robbers weren't after Harrington's money. They were after whatever proof the general had compiled against him. They thought Harrington had it, but he didn't. Chloe did. The black laptop in front of her wasn't just a computer. It was her grandfather's last will and testament. It was a weapon. It was a dead man's switch. And he had just handed it to the one person on Earth he knew would be able to use it. A cold, hard fury unlike anything she had ever felt before settled in Chloe's heart. It burned away the grief and the confusion, leaving behind a singular, razor-sharp purpose. Walter Harrington thought he had a new ally. He thought he had found a ghost to protect him from his past. He was wrong. He had just armed the one person who had the means, the motive, and the skill to bring his entire world crashing down. He thought the girl he was looking at was her grandfather's ghost. He was wrong. She was his judgment. The hum of the penthouse's climate control system was the only sound in the pre-dawn stillness. It was a sterile, soulless sound, the breathing of a gilded cage. Chloe sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the laptop screen casting a cold blue light on her face. The truth of her grandfather's life and death was a physical weight, pressing down on her, stealing the air from her lungs. He wasn't a murderer. He was a man who had made a deal with the devil, believing he could control the flames for a greater good. But the devil, Walter Harrington, had turned the fire on him. The rage that had solidified in her heart now cooled into something harder, denser, and far more dangerous. Purpose. Grief was a fog. Purpose was a compass. Her path was no longer about mourning what she had lost. It was about avenging it. She couldn't confront Harrington. Not yet. He was a king in his castle, surrounded by walls of money and influence. A direct accusation would be her last mistake. He would silence her as he had silenced her grandfather. Never fight your enemy on his terms. The general's voice echoed in her memory, a lesson from a long-ago chess game. Change the battlefield. Make him come to you. The laptop was the new battlefield. Her grandfather had left her an armory of information. She spent the next 2 hours devouring it, her mind absorbing the complex network of shell corporations, illegal arms deals, and political bribery. Senator Prescott was the key. He sat on the Senate Armed Services Committee, the very committee that approved Harrington Dynamics' multi-billion-dollar contracts. Her grandfather's logs detailed dozens of secret payments to offshore accounts held by the senator. The picture was simple and ugly. Harrington bought the politician, and the politician made him rich. Her strategy began to form, a 3-phase operation taking shape in her mind, just as the general had taught her. Phase 1, reconnaissance. She needed to observe the enemy, understand his habits and weaknesses, all under the perfect cover of the quiet, traumatized Maid's daughter. He would keep her close, a trophy, never seeing the scout in his own throne room. Phase 2, disruption. She would launch small, surgical strikes, anonymous leaks, whispers in the right ears, to attack his foundations, starting with the fragile career of Senator Prescott. Phase 3, checkmate. When his foundations were weak and his allies were gone, she would strike with the full weight of her grandfather's evidence to deliver the final, killing blow. She closed the laptop as the sun began to stream through her window, hiding it in a loose panel at the back of her closet. She showered, dressed, and erased every trace of the night's revelation from her face. When she looked in the mirror, a soldier stared back. She found Harrington in his private dining room. He looked up as she entered, his face softening into an expression of practiced concern. "Chloe," he said, his voice warm and paternal. "How are you feeling?" "Tired," she said, her voice quiet and small. "I didn't sleep much." "Understandable," he said, gesturing to a chair. "After what you did, you're part of the family now, Chloe. We need to talk about your future. A girl with your talents shouldn't be wasting them. I have connections. The best private academies. We can hone those skills. Your grandfather would have wanted that." It was a recruitment pitch. He saw her as a weapon, a legacy of the general he could mold for his own purposes. The irony was so thick she could taste it. "I don't know," she said, looking down. "It's all so much." "Of course," he said smoothly. "But know the offer is there. We're a team now, you and I. We have a shared interest in finding out who's behind this Nightingale threat." The casual way he lied, using her grandfather's murder to bind her to him, was chilling. He thinks I'm a pawn, she thought. He's about to find out I'm the queen. Over the next week, Chloe played her part to perfection. She was quiet, withdrawn, and observant. Harrington, convinced he had her under his thumb, let his guard down. He took calls in front of her, left sensitive documents on his desk, and spoke freely to his security chief, Thompson. Chloe absorbed it all, learning the rhythms of his life, his secondary passwords, his weaknesses. Her target was Senator Prescott. According to Harrington's calls, Prescott was getting nervous. He was the weak link. Using a burner phone and routing her connection through a series of public Wi-Fi networks as her grandfather had taught her, she crafted an anonymous email to Kenneth Morrison, a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist her grandfather's files had listed as a man of integrity. The email was short. Subject: a tip for the watchdog. Senator James Prescott. Look into his trips to the Cayman Islands. Ariadne Holdings. He sits on the Armed Services Committee. Ask why a public servant needs a secret offshore bank. This is just the first thread. Pull on it. She sent it from an untraceable address, then factory reset the phone and dropped it into a storm drain. The fuse was lit. The reaction came 3 days later. A small article, buried deep inside the nation's leading newspaper, written by Morrison. It didn't mention Harrington, but simply raised questions about Senator Prescott's financial improprieties. That evening, Harrington was a storm of fury. Chloe watched from the shadows as he paced his office, screaming into his phone at the senator. "You idiot. I told you to be careful. You fix this, James. You make it go away, or I swear I will bury you." He slammed the phone down, and called for his security chief. "Thompson," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Find out who's talking to the press. I want a name." Phase 2 had begun. The enemy was wounded. Chloe felt a grim satisfaction, knowing she had kicked the hornet's nest. Thompson's team swept the penthouse for bugs and investigated all the staff, including her mother. Chloe submitted to the scrutiny with placid calm. They found nothing. But the pressure on Senator Prescott was mounting as Morrison published a series of follow-up stories, each more prominent than the last. He had found the money trail. One evening, Harrington received a call that made his face go pale. He listened, then said, "Stay where you are. Don't talk to anyone. I'm on my way." He turned to Thompson. "The senator is about to break. He's threatening to go to the DOJ. We can't let that happen. Get the car." He swept out of the room, his attention completely focused on plugging the leak. This was her chance. With Harrington and his security chief gone, the penthouse was on lower alert. Chloe went to her room and retrieved the laptop. She had more than just breadcrumbs on Prescott. She had everything. Flight manifests, encrypted emails, and audio files of Harrington giving the senator direct orders. She compiled the most damning evidence into a single file and created another anonymous email. This time, the recipients were not just Morrison, but also the heads of the Senate Ethics Committee and the Attorney General herself. Subject: The Nightingale Sings. Attached is conclusive proof of bribery and conspiracy committed by Senator James Prescott and Walter Harrington. The file contains authenticated documents, emails, and audio recordings. Senator Prescott is a paid asset of a corrupt corporation. Do your duty. She hit send. The arrow was loosed, aimed at the heart of an empire. She wiped the laptop and returned it to its hiding place. She went back to her homework, her heart pounding a steady drumbeat of anticipation. She knew Harrington would trace the attack back to his own penthouse. He would know it was an inside job. Eventually, he would look at her, the quiet, grieving girl in the corner. Let him come. Her grandfather had taught her that sometimes you must sacrifice a pawn to trap a king. Harrington thought she was his pawn. He was about to find out she was the player on the other side of the board. The digital world moves at the speed of light, and Chloe's email was a lightning strike. The next morning, the story was a firestorm. The lead headline on every news channel and website: Senator Prescott implicated in bribery scandal. Harrington dynamics at center of probe. The irrefutable proof she had provided, especially the audio clips of Harrington commanding the senator, fueled the inferno. Cornered by the public evidence, the Department of Justice announced a formal investigation. Senator Prescott's career evaporated in hours. Stripped of his committees and abandoned by his party, he resigned by evening. From the quiet of the penthouse, Chloe watched the first pillar of Harrington's empire turn to dust. His company's stock cratered. Allies who once flocked to him now scrambled to denounce him. Harrington finally returned late the next night. He strode into the living area where Chloe sat reading, deliberately waiting. He looked like a man hollowed out by disaster, his face a haggard mask of fury. His eyes, burning with paranoia, swept the room and landed on her. The quiet girl, the ghost of the general. He dismissed his security chief, Thompson, with a flick of his wrist. The silence that fell was thick with accusation. "It was you," Harrington said, his voice a raw whisper. "The leak. It came from inside this building. It was you." Chloe slowly closed her book. She met his gaze, her own eyes clear and steady. The time for hiding was over. Yes. The simple affirmation struck him with more force than a denial. He stared, struggling to reconcile the timid girl with the architect of his ruin. "How? What?" "You have my grandfather's laptop," Chloe said, her voice even. "The one you gave me." Harrington's face went white. "Impossible. The files were locked. Michael's encryption was military grade. He gave me the keys," Chloe said. "A long time ago. He called them games. Chess moves. Lines from old books. He was preparing me, not to help you, but to stop you." The truth finally dawned on Harrington. He hadn't been betrayed by a new enemy. He had been outmaneuvered by an old one from beyond the grave. "He was going to expose you," Chloe continued, her voice gaining a cold, hard edge as she stood. "He knew you were using Nightingale to kill your rivals. He was going to turn you in. So you killed him." "No," Harrington sputtered, taking a step back. "He was a threat. He was going to expose a program that kept this country safe. He was a threat to your bank account, Chloe shot back, her anger finally surfacing. He was my grandfather, and you took him from me. Desperate, Harrington lunged for the phone. Thompson, get in here. He never finished. The front door burst open, revealing not Thompson, but Detective Miller and a team of FBI agents, guns drawn. Walter Harrington, Miller's voice boomed. You're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspicion of murder. Harrington froze. He looked from the agents to Chloe, his face a mask of utter defeat. He saw it all. She hadn't just leaked financial data. She had sent them everything. The Nightingale file. The proof linking him to her grandfather's murder. As they cuffed him, his eyes met Chloe's one last time. He saw no triumph, only the stark, quiet face of justice. 6 months later, Chloe and her mother stood on the lawn of a small, peaceful house they now owned, paid for with reward money from the DOJ. Walter Harrington was serving a life sentence without parole. His empire was in ruins. Susan put an arm around her daughter, a quiet pride in her eyes. Are you happy, honey? Chloe looked at their new home, a world away from the gilded cage of the penthouse. It was safe. It was normal. But she knew her grandfather's legacy was a part of her now, both a gift and a burden. I'm getting there, Mom, she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. The lesson was clear. Harrington believed power came from wealth and secrecy. But his empire, built on lies, was dismantled by a 15-year-old girl armed with the truth. True strength wasn't the power to eliminate threats, but the courage to stand for what's right. The maid's daughter, once invisible, had ensured her grandfather's honorable legacy would never be extinguished. And that's where we'll end the story for now. Whenever I share one of these, I hope it gives you a chance to step out of the everyday and just drift for a bit. I'd love to know what you were doing while listening. Maybe relaxing after work, on a late-night drive, or just winding down. Drop a line in the comments. I really do read them all. And if you want to make sure we cross paths again, hitting like and subscribing makes a huge difference. We are always trying to improve our stories, so feel free to also drop your feedback in the comment section below. Thanks for spending this time with me.